Blue Peter using the RAF information held at the Public Records Office. But dry documents can only hint at the stories behind a wartime squadron. I wanted to find someone who had actually flown Blue Peter in service. We struck gold with 242 Squadron. One of the flight commanders was Douglas Benham.
All pilots felt that they were immune from destruction. They almost thought they were immortal. Well, in my case, I considered that bullets would bounce off me. In retrospect, that seems very, very stupid indeed. A 242 Squadron was reformed at Turnhouse in Edinburgh in Scotland in April 1942. And the pilots came from a variety of different places, and so did all the Spitfire aircraft. And one of those aircraft was Blue Peter. We gave it the code name of R for Robert. This is my pilot's flying logbook, and this records all the flights that I did at that time. And when I opened the page, on May the 2nd and 3rd, 1942, I flew R for Robert, Blue Peter.
To begin with, the aircraft was shared amongst several pilots, but gradually each grew to have their favourite. Blue Peter became the personal machine of Pilot Officer David Hunter Blair.
I see from my photograph album that I have a photograph of David Hunter Blair in Blue Peter, and on the back I see that I've written Pilot Officer David Hunter Blair about to take off in R for Robert, which was Blue Peter.
David Hunter Blair was a Scotsman. He was born in Ayrshire and grew up in a magnificent castle, Blair Wan. The Hunter Blairs still live here. The families lived in Ayrshire for centuries. Blair Wan Castle was built for them 170 years ago. David was one of 3 Hunter Blair brothers. It must have been something to grow up in a house like this in the 1920s. There was a full complement of servants, and the long history of the Hunter Blairs can still be read from the family portraits hanging on the walls. David led an outdoor life on the estate. He was a popular member of the family and loved sport, particularly fishing for salmon in the River Girvan that runs all the way through Blair Wan. David Hunter Blair had a younger brother, James, sitting on the right of this picture next to David. Today, James runs the estate and remembers their childhood together at Blair Wan.
Dave would be very much a leader, and there'd be various practical jokes and things we'd play on the other neighbouring houses and other families and so on. He would be right in the forefront of this sort of thing. We went to my private school, and which was, for some reason, 400 miles away in Surrey when I was about 8 or 7. And he said, never mind what we're called at home. Here you call me Major and I call you Minor. And then he added, you could call me Bro, if you like, as a sort of sop.
Later, the boys went on to Eton College, the famous public school. In David's day, top hats were worn. That's changed now, although the uniform is still pretty unusual.
The school was divided between lower boys and upper boys. He was always an upper. And he was always kind and nice to me, but perhaps we were never terribly close, but I always admired him a lot. He was a lot of things I wasn't, like very good at games and very unshy. At that time I was self-conscious, and he wasn't, I don't think. Found life fun and easy.
This was David's house at Eton, known at the time by the name of the housemaster, C.R.N. Routh. During David's days at the college, 5 years, this building was to become his second home. Traditionally, the school has links with the army, but David decided with a group of friends to leave school as soon as possible after the outbreak of war and join the RAF. The new recruits were sent to a flying training school. A fellow trainee was David Green.
David Hunter Blair was a very good friend of mine. We got to know each other very well during the course. It was a quiet sort of a friendship. We just enjoyed each other's company. And in fact, even at this rather young age, when you don't expect to meet gentlemen, David was a gentleman.
Secretly, the young pilots went to train in the safer skies of the United States, well away from enemy aircraft. After crossing the Atlantic, they made the long journey by train to Oklahoma, home of the Spartan School of Aeronautics. We discovered one of the instructors was a keen amateur filmmaker. In 1941, he shot this remarkable colour film of the actual course that David Green and David Hunter Blair attended. Here's David Hunter Blair at the front of his section.
Now that's my lot, and I'm in there somewhere. We were people, I think, who, even at that age, were looking forward very expectantly to getting the best out of life. We were thoroughly enjoying what we were doing. We loved the travel, we loved the flying, and of course we did in fact come from all sorts of backgrounds, from schools in the East End of London right the way through grammar schools up to Eton. We all loaded up in the school buses and went to Miami Municipal Pool, which had been set aside for us that afternoon. Here we are walking down the path. David Hunter Blair is on the left of the picture. I am on the right, noticeable because I, for some reason or other, am wearing an RAF tie. I remember that day clearly. It was a lovely afternoon. We enjoyed it very much indeed. There's David. There he is. That's him. There he is. That's my boy, no teeth.
After 4 months in Oklahoma, the pilots earned their wings as solo flyers. Now they had to return to Europe and RAF operations.
So that was us going back to England. We had a lovely time, and it had been absolutely marvellous. But of course, we were looking forward to doing the job we'd got trained to do. But we couldn't wait to get onto squadrons.
Their first task, though, was to move on from flying steady training aircraft to the very fast Spitfire.
My first flight in a Spitfire happened in midwinter. Of course, once the engine was started, and once I was on the field and actually taking off, and she was bounding away like a homesick angel, I knew it was going to be good. And I was overcome, lost for words. After I got down on the ground again, I was very anxious to log this flight, of course, and I did so immediately. And on the right-hand side of the logbook, one is permitted to make the odd comment about the trip. And I could only think of one word to put down. I just put down blimey.
Newly trained, David Hunter Blair could now join an operational unit, 242 Squadron, where he teamed up with AD 540 Blue Peter.
On May the 19th, 1942, part of 242 Squadron, including Blue Peter and David Hunter Blair, was sent here to RAF Air. Today is just ordinary farmland and an industrial estate. It's hard to imagine that 50 years ago it was a busy airfield, reverberating to the roar of the Spitfire's Merlin engines.
242 Squadron had been sent on a special mission. The huge ocean liner, the Queen Mary, was bringing thousands of American soldiers to Glasgow. The pilots were ordered to protect her from enemy aircraft.
On the 23rd, a similar instruction was given to Pilot Officer David Hunter Blair to fly Blue Peter, covering the Queen Mary as she was now approaching the docks.
Some things never change. The weather in air that day, like today, was atrocious. Driving rain and thick low cloud. But their mission was considered so important, they had to fly, no matter what the weather.
The records tell the story of what happened at 1300 hours, 1 o'clock, when David Hunter Blair took off on patrol in Blue Peter.
I took off in the Spitfire and did a search for David Hunter Blair's Blue Peter aircraft the weather was so appalling, I failed to find his aircraft.
Nobody knows why David Hunter Blair crashed in Blue Peter. Some say he could have lost control in the terrible visibility, or his oxygen failed and he passed out. What we do know is the aircraft crashed somewhere here on the bleak mountain, Cairnsmore of Carsfairn. Tragically, David Hunter Blair was killed in the crash. He's buried here in the family cemetery at Blair Wan, only 15 miles from where Blue Peter came down. On his tombstone reads his age when he died. Just 19 years old.
I was having lunch at school and my housemaster went out to the telephone and I was called out to see him, and that was it. It was a blow. Mm. I remember we had a night watch at school who, because there was once a bad fire at school at Eton, and she came in to see if I was asleep, and I pretended to be asleep because I didn't want to worry, but of course I wasn't asleep that night. Mm.
We had learned so much about David Hunter Blair and his aircraft, but we hadn't discovered exactly where Blue Peter lay. All we knew from records and eyewitnesses was that she was buried somewhere on Cairnsmore of Carsfairn. For months, members of the Dumfries and Galloway Aviation Society searched the bleak mountainside. Exactly 51 years to the day of the crash, on the 23rd of May 1993, their search ended.
This is the first time in 50 years it's been seen. And there's a whole load of there, Jim. There's a whole lot of aircraft there. That's definitely the engine there. Marvellous.
2 weeks after the discovery, I joined a larger recovery party to help carry out a full excavation of the wreckage.
When Blue Peter was buried after the crash, she was broken up so that she could be placed in a hole, as you see now. 50 years on, you can still see a mass of twisted metal. Most bits you can identify, including this here. This is the top part of the engine.
The leader of the long search was Ralph Davidson.
Well, we can obviously tell it's a plane, but how do we know it's the Blue Peter AD540?
Well, John, this plate here identifies it. I took this home the second visit here, and we discovered on the back someone has scratched forward AD540, and the initials look like WHP, but it positively identifies it as AD540. Blue Peter.
Well, after several hours of digging, they've managed to unearth quite a few bits of the aircraft. Here's part of the wing. This is the air intake, and one of the most recognizable pieces of the Spitfire was, of course, the propeller. And you can still see damage which must have occurred on impact.
To get Blue Peter off the mountainside to start the long process of restoration needed a modern flying machine from nearby HMS Gannet. September 1993, a lone piper plays a lament at a commemoration for David Hunter Blair and Blue Peter. Remembered by this plaque on the mountainside and the roar of Spitfires over Cairnsmore of Carsfairn once more.